Mother Bear followed this lone human baby in the forest. The reason shocked everyone. Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new to our channel. The sun barely pushed through the thick trees of Pine Ridge Forest. Morning dew still clung to every leaf, creating tiny mirrors that caught what little light filtered down. In this quiet corner of the wilderness, something strange was happening. A small human baby, no more than 18 months old, sat alone on a bed of fallen pine needles. His blue pajamas were dirty, his cheeks streaked with dried tears. This was little Noah Collins. No one knew how Noah ended up here, so far from any trail or campsite. The nearest town, Oak Ridge, was 5 miles away. What everyone did know was that something impossible was happening. Just 20 feet behind the child, watching with careful eyes, stood a massive brown bear. The bear didn't charge. She didn't roar. She simply watched, her head tilted slightly as if trying to understand what this tiny human was doing in her forest. Samantha Willis had been the first to spot them. An early morning hiker with a passion for wildlife photography, she had frozen in place when she saw the scene. Her hands shook so badly she could barely take the pictures that would soon shock the entire country. Through her zoom lens, she saw something even more incredible: the bear was protecting the child. Every time Noah tried to crawl toward a steep drop-off nearby, the bear would move, positioning herself to block his path. When Noah cried, the bear made soft huffing sounds until he quieted. Samantha couldn't believe her eyes. This wasn't just any bear, this was the notorious female brown bear locals called Scarface, known for being fiercely territorial and dangerous to hikers. "I've studied bears for 20 years, Forest Ranger Tom Blackwood said later, examining the photographs. "I've never seen anything like this. That bear should have either attacked or run away. Instead, she was guarding him." The mystery only deepened when search and rescue teams arrived. The bear retreated into the trees but didn't leave completely. She watched from a distance as paramedics checked the baby. Noah was dehydrated but otherwise unharmed, miraculous for a toddler who had spent a night alone in predator-filled woods. The bear kept other animals away, wildlife biologist Maria Chen explained, pointing to clear tracks in the mud. "See these wolf prints? They circle around but never come closer than 30 feet. That's because of the bear. She established a protective perimeter." Back in Oak Ridge, Noah's parents, Claire and David Collins, had been frantic. They had put Noah to bed in his crib the night before, checking on him before they themselves went to sleep. Somehow, between midnight and dawn, someone had taken their baby. The front door was found wide open, but nothing else in the house was disturbed: no footprints, no fingerprints, nothing on the security cameras. It was as if Noah had simply vanished. The truth would prove far stranger than anyone imagined. 3 days after Noah's rescue, Claire Collins was standing in her kitchen when she noticed something odd through the window. At the edge of their backyard, where the property met the beginning of the forest, stood Scarface. The bear wasn't threatening or approaching, she just stood there, looking toward the house. When Claire called the forest rangers, they made a shocking discovery. Buried in the Collins' backyard, just inches below the surface, they found bones, small bones. Bear cub bones. This property was forest land before it was developed 15 years ago, explained forensic veterinarian Dr. Eliza Jones. Carbon dating confirms these bones are about that old. This was Scarface's cub. The picture slowly came together. 15 years earlier, during the construction of the Collins home, something had happened to Scarface's cub, perhaps construction equipment, perhaps human intervention. No one could say for certain. What was clear was that Scarface had never forgotten where her baby had died. Bears have extraordinary spatial memory and sense of smell, Maria Chen told reporters. When she found Noah alone in the forest, something triggered her maternal instincts. Instead of seeing a human, she saw a baby that needed protection, just like her cub had needed protection all those years ago. The night Noah disappeared, his bedroom window had been left cracked open for fresh air. Investigators believe a strong gust of wind may have fully opened it. Noah, who had recently learned to climb out of his crib, could have crawled out the window into the backyard. From there, disoriented and following random paths, he wandered into the forest, where Scarface found him. Where she remembered her own loss. Where she decided that, this time, a baby would not die in her forest. Noah's parents decided to move. They couldn't stay in a house built on the site of such tragedy. Before they left, they did something unprecedented. They worked with forest services to establish the land as a protected bear sanctuary. Today, a small plaque stands at the entrance to what is now called Scarface Reserve. It reads, "Where a mother's love transcended species. Scarface still roams these woods." Sometimes, hikers spot her at the edge of the tree line, looking out at the human world that took her cub, but gave her, for one night, a chance to be a mother again. "It makes you wonder," Samantha Willis said in her final interview about that morning. "If a bear can show such compassion to a human child, what does that say about us? Maybe we're not as different as we think." Noah Collins is 5 years old now. He's too young to understand what happened that night, but on his bedroom wall hangs a framed photograph of Scarface, taken from a safe distance. When asked about it, he simply says, "That's my forest friend. Mom says she watched over me when I was lost." And perhaps, in the wisdom only children possess, that simple explanation is enough. What few people knew was that Noah's story didn't end with his rescue. The connection between the boy and the bear continued in ways that would astonish scientists and locals alike. Dr. Maria Chen decided to stay in Oak Ridge after the initial incident. What had begun as a simple research trip turned into a years-long study of interspecies behavior. She rented a small cabin at the edge of the newly established Scarface Reserve, setting up cameras and observation points with permission from forest services. "I couldn't walk away from this," she explained during her TED Talk 3 years later. "In 20 years of wildlife biology, I'd never witnessed anything that challenged our understanding of animal cognition so profoundly." The footage she captured told an extraordinary story. Scarface would regularly patrol the borders of the reserve, keeping other predators at bay. But on certain days, particularly when storms approached, she would emerge from the forest and sit at the boundary line, looking out toward the town where Noah now lived with his family in their new home. Claire Collins noticed this pattern too. On those same days, Noah would become unusually restless, often asking to visit the trees. The first few times, Claire dismissed it as coincidence, but after the 5th occurrence, even she couldn't deny that something unusual was happening. It was as if they could sense each other, Claire told the local newspaper. "I know how that sounds. If I hadn't lived through this myself, I'd think it was nonsense too." Noah's pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Martinez, offered a more scientific theory. Children who experience trauma at a young age sometimes develop heightened sensitivities to certain environmental cues. Noah might be responding to changes in barometric pressure that precede storms, the same changes that might trigger Scarface's protective instincts. But others weren't convinced by such rational explanations. When Noah turned 3, he began drawing pictures of a large brown figure that he consistently called Mama Bear. Despite having no conscious memory of his night in the forest, he would tell elaborate stories about Mama Bear teaching him which berries to eat and how to find water in hollow tree trunks, details he couldn't possibly know. Children have remarkable imaginations, child psychologist Dr. Robert Emerson noted. But Noah's stories contain surprisingly accurate wilderness survival information. When I showed his drawings to Dr. Chen, she confirmed these were behaviors specific to the bears in this region. The Collins family struggled with the attention. Reporters camped outside their new home for weeks. Documentary film crews from National Geographic and BBC requested exclusive rights to Noah's story. Scientists from around the world sent research proposals. The family declined most requests, wanting to give Noah as normal a childhood as possible. David Collins, who had remained skeptically quiet through much of the initial media frenzy, found his own perspective changing over time. A former investment banker with little interest in wildlife, he now volunteered weekends at the reserve, helping maintain trails and educate visitors. "What happened to my son forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew," he admitted during a rare interview. "I used to see nature as something separate from us, something to be controlled or exploited. Now I understand we're all connected in ways we barely comprehend." This new philosophy was tested severely when Noah was 4. A mining company proposed a large operation just 3 miles from the reserve. The project promised jobs and economic growth for Oak Ridge, which had struggled since the closure of its lumber mill. Many locals supported the plan. The Collins family found themselves at the center of a community divided. At town meetings, supporters of the mine argued that one unusual bear encounter shouldn't halt progress. Opponents pointed to the growing tourism around the reserve and the environmental impact mining would have on the entire ecosystem. The debate might have remained civil if not for what happened next. During a particularly heated town hall meeting, 7-year-old Emma Lawson, the mayor's daughter, went missing. Search parties formed immediately. As night fell and temperatures dropped, fear gripped the community. Emma was found at dawn, curled up asleep inside a hollow log half a mile into the reserve. Beside her, clearly visible in the disturbed earth, were bear tracks, large ones. "She was following me," Emma explained simply, just like Noah said she would. Emma's account sent shockwaves through the community. She had been playing near the reserve boundary when she heard her parents arguing about the mine at a distance. Upset, she had wandered into the woods to hide. When darkness fell, she became disoriented and afraid. "Then I remembered Noah's story about the bear that keeps children safe," Emma told police officers. "I called for Mama Bear, and she came. She walked behind me and showed me where to hide for the night." A medical examination confirmed Emma was unharmed, cold and hungry but without injury. The search team found no evidence of any human involvement in her survival. What they did find were clear signs that a large animal had circled the hollow log throughout the night, keeping sufficient distance to not frighten the child but close enough to ward off predators. Skeptics suggested a coincidence. Emma had found shelter by chance, and the bear tracks were unrelated. But when Noah visited Emma in the hospital, their conversation, recorded by a nurse, raised more questions than answers. "Did she huff 3 times when she found you?" Noah asked. "Yes." "How did you know?" Emma replied. "That's how she says hello to cubs," Noah explained, with the certainty only children possess. Dr. Chen confirmed that this specific vocalization pattern, 3 short huffs, was indeed a mother bear's typical greeting to her cubs upon returning to a den. This detail had never been mentioned in any public account of Noah's experience. The mining proposal was withdrawn a week later. In its place, the company offered to fund an educational center at the reserve entrance, a compromise that satisfied most community members on both sides of the debate. As Noah approached his 5th birthday, Claire and David noticed him becoming more articulate about his connection to Scarface. No longer content with simple stories about Mama Bear, he began asking complex questions about why people hurt the forest and why animals couldn't talk to humans. "I think we understand each other just fine," Noah told his preschool teacher during a class discussion about communication. "People just forgot how to listen." This statement, innocent as it was, captured the attention of Dr. Eliza Jones, who had continued studying the bare bone fragments found in the Collins' original backyard. Her latest carbon dating tests had revealed something odd. The cub hadn't died 15 years ago during construction as initially believed. The bones were much older, dating back nearly 50 years. "This changes our entire understanding of Scarface's motivation," Dr. Jones explained to the Collins family. Bears typically live 20 to 30 years in the wild. Scarface is estimated to be around 20 years old now, based on dental examinations during her last hibernation period. She couldn't possibly remember losing a cub at that location. It wasn't her cub at all. This revelation prompted Maria Chen to review thousands of hours of wildlife camera footage. What she discovered in the archived material was astonishing. The distinctive scarring pattern on the bear's face, which had given her the nickname Scarface, was previously assumed to be from fights with other bears. However, the scars formed a pattern consistent with old wire snare injuries. Someone tried to trap her when she was much younger, Chen concluded. Based on the scar tissue formation, I'd estimate this happened when she was just a cub herself. She likely watched her mother die in a similar trap. In light of this new information, Scarface's behavior toward Noah took on even deeper significance. She hadn't protected him because she remembered losing her own cub. She protected him because she remembered being a vulnerable cub herself, one who had not been saved. Noah's 6th birthday brought another surprise. Claire and David had planned a small celebration at their home, inviting only family and close friends to minimize the continuing public interest in their son. As Noah opened presents in the backyard, a Forest Service ranger truck pulled up urgently. "Scarface has been shot," the ranger announced grimly. "Poachers." "She's alive, but critically injured." David didn't hesitate. "What can we do?" Within hours, a makeshift veterinary surgical center was established at the reserve entrance. Dr. Jones flew in specialists from the nearest wildlife rehabilitation center. As word spread through town, dozens of Oak Ridge residents gathered outside, holding a silent vigil. Noah, despite his parents' attempts to shield him from the situation, became inconsolable. "She's hurting," he repeated between sobs. "She's calling for help." Claire and David exchanged worried glances. They had always supported Noah's special connection with Scarface, but this level of distress seemed beyond normal empathy. After consultation with Dr. Martinez, they made an unprecedented decision. Under strict supervision, Noah was allowed to approach the medical tent where Scarface lay sedated after surgery to remove the bullet. Standing at a safe distance, with his father's hands firmly on his shoulders, Noah whispered something that only Scarface could hear. The bear's vital signs, which had been erratic despite medication, suddenly stabilized. "I've never seen anything like it," admitted the wildlife veterinarian. "It's as if she recognized his scent or his voice." Scarface recovered slowly but steadily. The poachers were apprehended 3 days later, trophy hunters who had crossed state lines specifically to target the famous bear. Public outrage at their actions led to stricter anti-poaching legislation being fast-tracked through the state assembly. By the time Noah started first grade, the story of the boy and the bear had evolved from local legend to case study. Universities established research programs dedicated to exploring interspecies empathy. Conservation efforts around the world began incorporating new approaches based on findings from the Scarface Reserve. Noah himself developed into a remarkably compassionate child. His teachers noted his unusual ability to resolve conflicts among classmates and his insistence on including everyone in activities. When asked why he was so kind to others, his answer was simple: "Because everyone gets scared and lost sometimes." On cool autumn mornings, visitors to the reserve might glimpse a large brown bear watching from a distance as a small boy walks the boundary trail with his parents. They never cross the invisible line that separates their worlds, yet something powerful connects them, something that transcends the barriers between species. Scientists continue to debate the exact nature of this connection. Is it mutual trauma, evolutionary empathy, something more mystical? Theories multiply with each passing year. But for Noah and Scarface, explanations aren't necessary. They share something that exists beyond words, a bond forged in one night of unexpected protection that changed both their lives forever. As Noah writes in his first-grade journal, "Some people don't believe my bear stories. That's okay. The forest knows they're true. And perhaps that, too, is wisdom enough." By the time Noah turned 7, the quiet life his parents had tried to create began shifting in unexpected ways. The educational center at Scarface Reserve had grown into a renowned research facility, attracting scientists from across the globe. What had begun as a local curiosity had evolved into something far more significant: a living laboratory for studying animal cognition and interspecies relationships. Dr. Maria Chen, now heading the research department, published her preliminary findings in the Journal of Comparative Psychology. Her paper, Adaptive Empathy in Ursus arctos, a case study of cross-species protective behavior, sparked heated debates in academic circles. Most of her colleagues remained skeptical, attributing Scarface's behavior to coincidence or misinterpretation of natural instincts. "We must be cautious about anthropomorphizing wild animals," warned Dr. James Richardson from Harvard University during a symposium on animal cognition. "Bears aren't people in fur coats. They don't adopt human children or form emotional attachments as we understand them." Chen disagreed. "We're not suggesting Scarface thinks like a human. We're suggesting that our understanding of bear cognition is woefully incomplete. The data points to complex decision-making that our current models can't fully explain." The academic controversy might have remained confined to university lecture halls if not for a documentary filmmaker named Layla Een. Her film, The Guardian, The Boy and the Bear of Pine Ridge Forest, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival to critical acclaim. Using a combination of interviews, Dr. Chen's research footage, and hauntingly beautiful cinematography of the reserve, Een created a narrative that resonated with audiences worldwide. "I didn't set out to make a sentimental nature film," Een explained during a post-screening discussion. I wanted to explore the gray area between scientific observation and human experience. What happens when something challenges both our understanding of nature and our place within it? The film's success brought new waves of attention to Oak Ridge. Tourism doubled, then tripled. The small town struggled to accommodate the influx of visitors, many of whom hoped to catch a glimpse of the famous bear or, more problematically, the boy she had protected. David and Claire Collins hired a security company to patrol their property after several incidents of trespassing. They declined lucrative offers for exclusive interviews and turned down a six-figure book deal. Their priority remained protecting Noah's childhood from the media circus. "He's just a little boy who wants to ride his bike and play with friends," Claire told their lawyer after rejecting yet another interview request. "We won't turn him into a sideshow attraction." But as Noah grew, his own curiosity about his unique experience deepened. The questions he asked became more sophisticated. Why had Scarface chosen to help him? Could other bears learn to coexist peacefully with humans? What happened to animals' minds when they formed connections with different species? His second-grade teacher, Mrs. Elizabeth Palmer, recognized Noah's unusual intellectual curiosity and contacted Dr. Chen. "This child has questions that go beyond what I can answer in a classroom setting. Would you consider meeting with him, not as a research subject, but as a student?" After careful discussion with the Collins family, a monthly mentorship arrangement began. Every third Saturday, Noah would spend the morning at the research center learning about wildlife biology, conservation, and animal behavior. Dr. Chen was careful never to treat him as an experimental subject, instead fostering his natural interest in the natural world. "He has an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that many of my graduate students lack," Chen confided to Claire after one session. "He notices patterns most adults would miss." During one of these educational mornings, when Noah was nearly 8, something unprecedented occurred. He was helping Dr. Chen classify trail camera footage when he suddenly went very still, staring at the monitor. "She's trying to tell us something," he said, pointing to a sequence showing Scarface deliberately marking a particular tree at the northwest boundary of the reserve. "Bears often mark territory by clawing trees," Dr. Chen explained gently. "No, this is different," Noah insisted. "She's doing it every day at the same time. She wants someone to see." To humor him, Chen reviewed the footage more carefully. To her astonishment, Noah was right. For 14 consecutive days, Scarface had visited the same boundary tree at approximately 7:15 a.m., leaving distinctive marking patterns that differed from typical territorial behavior. "The consistency is unusual," Chen admitted, "but that doesn't necessarily mean, can we go there?" Noah interrupted, his expression unusually serious. "Please." After consulting with forest rangers and Noah's parents, a carefully supervised expedition was arranged. David Collins insisted on accompanying his son, along with Dr. Chen and 2 experienced rangers. They arrived at the marked tree shortly after dawn on a crisp autumn morning. At first, they found nothing unusual, just a large pine with distinctive claw marks on its trunk. Noah circled the tree slowly, examining the ground with the methodical care he'd learned from Dr. Chen. Then he stopped, kneeling beside a depression in the earth, partially covered by fallen leaves. "Here," he said simply. The adults exchanged skeptical glances until one of the rangers brushed away the leaves, revealing a small opening, the entrance to what appeared to be an old animal den. Further investigation revealed it was a disused wolf den abandoned years ago when the wolf pack moved deeper into the mountains. Inside, carefully arranged in a way that could not possibly be accidental, lay 3 objects: a child's mitten, a rusted hunting trap, and a small, smooth river stone. The mitten was unmistakable. It matched the pair Noah had been wearing the night he was found in the forest. The trap was old but functional, identical to the type that had likely scarred Scarface as a cub. The stone's significance remained unclear until Dr. Chen examined it under a portable microscope. "There are trace blood samples on this stone," she announced, her voice unsteady, "and what appears to be milk residue. This is unprecedented." Laboratory analysis later confirmed the blood belonged to Scarface, while the milk residue matched the composition of bear milk. The stone had been used as a nursing tool, a documented but rare behavior where mother bears with mouth injuries sometimes use smooth stones to help cubs access milk when direct nursing is difficult. "She's created a museum," Dr. Chen concluded in her supplemental research paper, "a deliberate collection of objects that represent significant events in her life: the human child she protected, the trap that injured her, and a tool that connects to her own experience of motherhood." The discovery rocked the scientific community. Critics argued that humans had planted the items to fabricate evidence, prompting an independent investigation. When that investigation confirmed the authenticity of the site and the impossibility of human interference, the den had been sealed by natural debris for at least 2 seasons before Scarface began marking the tree. The implications became impossible to dismiss. "We must reconsider our fundamental assumptions about animal cognition," admitted Dr. Richardson, previously one of Chen's most vocal critics. "The deliberate collection and preservation of symbolically significant objects suggests a level of abstract thinking, previously undocumented in non-primate species." For Noah, now approaching his 9th birthday, the discovery confirmed what he had always known intuitively. "She remembers everything," he told his parents, "just like people do." The Bear Museum, as it came to be called, was carefully preserved and studied but not open to the public. Instead, digital documentation was made available to researchers worldwide, leading to new studies in comparative psychology and animal cognition. Scarface herself remained elusive, appearing less frequently on trail cameras as she aged. Estimates suggested she was now in her early 20s, elderly for a wild bear. Dr. Chen worried that each winter might be her last, though she kept these concerns from Noah. Then came the winter of Noah's 9th year, the harshest in decades. Record snowfall isolated Oak Ridge for weeks. Power outages became common. Food grew scarce as delivery trucks couldn't navigate the mountain roads. The Collins family, well prepared with emergency supplies, fared better than most, but worry for their neighbors led David to organize a community resource sharing program. Noah insisted on helping, using his sled to deliver canned goods to elderly neighbors. Claire accompanied him on these expeditions, never allowing him to venture far from home in the dangerous conditions, until the morning they received the call about the Henderson family. Jim and Melissa Henderson lived in an isolated cabin 3 miles outside town with their 4-year-old twins, Lily and Lucas. Jim had ventured out 2 days earlier to reach the emergency medical center in town. Melissa had developed a high fever and needed antibiotics. He never returned. The radio call came from Melissa, barely coherent through fever and fear. The children were hungry, the firewood was nearly gone, and the temperature was dropping. "No one can reach them in these conditions. The emergency coordinator explained to the volunteer group gathered at the community center. The snow is too deep for vehicles, and the Forest Service helicopter can't fly in this weather. Noah, who had accompanied his father to the meeting, spoke up. "I know a way." The adults might have dismissed him, but the past years had taught them to listen when Noah Collins made such declarations. Under normal circumstances, David would never have agreed to his son's plan, but these weren't normal circumstances, and children's lives were at stake. "You're sure?" he asked Noah privately. "She'll help us," Noah replied with absolute certainty. The plan took shape quickly. David, Noah, and 2 experienced forest rangers would attempt to reach the Henderson cabin on foot, using Noah's knowledge of game trails that might be more passable than the main roads. They would bring emergency supplies, medication, and a portable stretcher. Claire protested vehemently until Melissa's weakening voice came through on the radio again, with the sound of crying children in the background. Some risks had to be taken. The expedition set out at dawn, following Noah's lead. The conditions were brutal, wind-driven snow reduced visibility to mere feet, and temperatures hovered near zero. The men struggled through snowdrifts, while Noah moved with surprising confidence, occasionally stopping to listen to something only he seemed to hear. "This way," he would say, pointing to passages between trees that adult eyes might have missed. 2 miles into the forest, disaster struck. One of the rangers broke through a snow-covered ice patch over a stream, plunging into frigid water up to his chest. Hypothermia became an immediate threat. David and the second ranger managed to pull him out, but it was clear he needed immediate medical attention. "We have to turn back," the second ranger insisted, already helping his partner remove wet clothing. David looked torn, glancing between the injured man and the direction of the Henderson cabin, still a mile away. "Dad and I will go on," Noah said firmly. "You get him back to town." The rangers objected strenuously, but time was working against them all. A compromise was reached: emergency supplies would be divided. The rangers would return with most of the group's safety equipment, while David and Noah would continue with the medical supplies for Melissa, carrying only basic survival gear. As father and son pressed on alone, the storm intensified. Twice they lost the trail completely, finding themselves in unfamiliar sections of the forest. David's wilderness experience was substantial, but even he became disoriented in the whiteout conditions. "We need to find shelter," he finally admitted, his face crusted with ice. "We can try again when the storm eases." "We're close," Noah insisted. "Just a little further." Then came the sound, 3 distinct huffs cutting through the howling wind. Noah froze, then broke into a smile. "She's here," he whispered. David saw nothing at first, just swirling snow between dark tree trunks. Then, a massive shadow materialized 20 yards ahead, the unmistakable silhouette of Scarface. The bear made no threatening moves. She simply turned and began walking slowly through the trees, looking back as if to ensure they followed. "Noah, wait," David began, but his son was already moving, following the bear with absolute trust. What choice did he have? David followed, one hand on the emergency flare gun in his pocket. For nearly 30 minutes, they trailed the bear through paths that seemed impossibly clear of deep snow. Scarface chose routes between trees where overhanging branches had blocked the worst of the snowfall. She paused occasionally, waiting when they fell behind. The Henderson cabin appeared ahead just as daylight began to fade, a dim light visible through frost-covered windows. Scarface stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching as Noah and David approached the door. Inside, they found a desperate situation. Melissa lay semi-conscious on a couch pulled close to the dying fire, her fever dangerously high. The twins huddled under blankets nearby, frightened and hungry. The cabin temperature was barely above freezing. David immediately administered the antibiotics and began treating Melissa, while Noah focused on rebuilding the fire. The problem was immediately apparent: there was almost no dry firewood left. "Stay inside," David instructed as he zipped up his coat. "I'll find something to burn." "Wait," Noah said, moving to the window. Outside, in the deepening twilight, a remarkable scene was unfolding. Scarface was dragging a fallen branch toward the cabin. As they watched in astonishment, she made 3 trips to the woodpile at the side of the house, retrieving branches and logs that had been buried under snow. She arranged them in a neat pile near the front door, then retreated to the forest's edge. "She's helping us," Noah said simply. David, a man whose worldview had been repeatedly challenged over the past years, found he could no longer deny the evidence before his eyes. "Yes," he acknowledged quietly. "She is." The wood Scarface had uncovered allowed them to restore heat to the cabin through the night. David tended to Melissa while Noah cared for the twins, telling them stories about forest animals that made them giggle despite their fear. Occasionally, Noah would glance out the window to where Scarface maintained her vigil at the forest's edge, a dark sentinel against the snow. Once, when David checked, he found Noah sitting by the window with his palm pressed against the glass. On the other side, barely visible in the moonlight, was Scarface's massive paw print in the snow, perfectly aligned with the boy's small hand. Morning brought clear skies and the sound of approaching snowmobiles. A rescue party from town had managed to get through once the storm abated. As medical personnel took charge of Melissa and the children, Noah stepped outside one last time. Scarface was gone, but a clear trail of her tracks led back into the forest. "She knows we're safe now," Noah explained to his father. The Henderson family's rescue became another chapter in the growing legend. Jim Henderson was found alive the next day, sheltering in a cave after becoming disoriented in the storm. Once recovered, he visited the Collins family to express his gratitude. "The Rangers told me what happened," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "About the bear. About Noah. I didn't believe in miracles before, but—" "Not miracles," Noah corrected gently. "Just friendship." As Noah entered 4th grade, the research at Scarface Reserve expanded to include collaborative projects with indigenous knowledge keepers. Elijah Blackfoot, an elder from the region's native community, began working with Dr. Chen to document traditional understandings of bear behavior. "Our stories speak of guardian bears who watch over lost children," Elijah explained during a presentation at the research center. "Science dismissed these as mere legends, but perhaps your experience shows there is wisdom in the old ways of knowing." Noah absorbed these teachings eagerly, often sitting with Elijah to learn traditional tracking methods and the symbolic language of animal behavior. Their conversations frequently turned philosophical in ways that surprised the adults present. "Do you think animals have souls?" Noah once asked the elder. Elijah considered the question carefully. "Our people believe all living things carry spirit, not the same as humans, but no less important." "What do you think, Noah Collins?" "I think we're all connected," Noah replied. "Like threads in the same blanket. We just forget how to feel the tugging sometimes." Elijah smiled. "You speak with old wisdom for such young eyes." The winter of Noah's 10th year brought both celebration and concern. The reserve was officially designated a National Wildlife Research Area, ensuring its protection in perpetuity. But Scarface had not been sighted for nearly 2 months, unusually long, even accounting for seasonal hibernation. Noah insisted she was still there, still watching. "She's just tired," he explained. "Bears get old too." Dr. Chen privately told Claire and David that Scarface had likely reached the natural end of her lifespan. 25 years is exceptional for a wild bear, especially one with her history of injuries. "We should prepare Noah for the possibility that she won't emerge in spring." But when spring arrived, bringing the forest's renewal, something unexpected happened. Trail cameras near Scarface's known den captured footage of not one bear, but 2, Scarface, noticeably thinner and moving slowly, accompanied by a younger female bear with distinctive facial markings similar to her own. "A daughter?" Dr. Chen wondered, reviewing the footage. "But she's too old to have cubs? This bear is at least 3 or 4 years old." DNA analysis of hair samples eventually provided an answer that again defied conventional understanding. The younger bear was indeed Scarface's offspring, but from a litter born nearly 5 years earlier. Female bears typically drive away their grown cubs to establish separate territories. Yet Scarface had somehow maintained contact with this daughter, and now they traveled together, the elder bear clearly benefiting from the younger's hunting prowess. "It's reciprocal care," Chen explained in her updated research. "The daughter is now caring for the mother who once cared for her, a behavior rarely documented in wild bears." Noah, now approaching his 11th birthday, seemed unsurprised by this development. "That's what family does," he said simply when shown the footage. "They help each other." As Scarface's movements became increasingly limited by age, her daughter, nicknamed Echo by the research team, began appearing more frequently at the boundaries where Scarface had once patrolled. She showed no interest in human interaction but maintained the same vigilant presence her mother had established. Noah's connection to the forest continued to deepen. Under the tutelage of both Dr. Chan and Elder Blackfoot, he developed remarkable skills in wildlife tracking and observation. His journal entries, initially simple childish observations, evolved into detailed field notes that Chen occasionally consulted for her research. "He sees things differently," she told Claire during a parent-teacher conference. "Not just the physical signs, but patterns of behavior that even trained researchers might miss." The summer of Noah's 11th year brought both triumph and heartbreak. The Scarface Reserve's model of conservation, combining scientific research with indigenous knowledge and community involvement, was being replicated in wildlife areas across the country. The educational programs developed there reached thousands of schoolchildren annually. Noah himself, though kept away from publicity, contributed drawings and stories to the children's section of the visitor center. Then came the morning when Noah woke his parents before dawn, tears streaming down his face. "She's gone," he said simply. David and Claire had learned to trust their son's inexplicable connection to the forest. David immediately called Dr. Chen, who organized a small search team to check Scarface's known denning areas. They found her body in a small clearing, surrounded by wildflowers, a peaceful place dappled with morning sunlight. Echo lay beside her mother's form, reluctantly moving away only when the humans approached. Examination confirmed what they already knew: Scarface had died of natural causes, her remarkable life coming to its natural conclusion. The community of Oak debated how to honor her memory. Some suggested a taxidermy display at the visitor center, others a bronze statue. Noah rejected both ideas. She belongs to the forest, he insisted. Not in a building. In the end, they followed his wishes. Scarface was buried in her chosen resting place, the location marked only by a simple stone. The official records noted her scientific contributions and the paradigm-shifting research her behavior had inspired. But for the people of Oak Ridge, and especially for Noah Collins, she represented something that transcended scientific categorization. A reminder that the boundaries between species might be more permeable than humans had believed, that compassion could manifest in unexpected forms, and that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from simply paying attention to the world beyond our human concerns. Echo remained in Scarface's territory, occasionally glimpsed by researchers but never approaching humans as her mother had done. Yet, on certain mornings, Noah would walk to the reserve boundary and stand quietly. More often than not, a large bear would appear briefly at the forest's edge, close enough to see, too distant to reach. "Is she like Scarface?" Dr. Chen once asked him. Noah considered the question carefully. "No," he finally answered. "She's herself. But she remembers." As Noah grew into adolescence, his childhood experience shaped his developing identity in profound ways. He volunteered at wildlife rehabilitation centers, joined conservation projects, and eventually began speaking to small groups about human-wildlife coexistence, always deflecting personal questions about his own story and focusing instead on the larger message. "We think we're separate from nature," he would explain to attentive audiences, "but we're not. We're part of the same world, breathing the same air, drinking the same water. Maybe we just need to remember how to listen." The Collins family remained in Oak Ridge, becoming integral members of a community transformed by their story. Claire established a foundation supporting environmental education in schools. David, the former skeptic, became an advocate for conservation-based economic development, helping the town transition from resource extraction to sustainable tourism and research. And Noah? He continued to visit the forest boundary. Sometimes Echo would appear, sometimes not. But the connection remained, not dramatic or miraculous. Simply a quiet acknowledgement between two different beings sharing the same world. On his 16th birthday, Noah hiked alone to Scarface's resting place, now covered with moss and wildflowers. He sat beside the stone for hours, writing in his journal as afternoon light filtered through the trees. What he wrote remained private, but when he returned home that evening, something in his expression had shifted. A certain peace had settled in his eyes. "Are you okay?" Claire asked, recognizing that something had changed. "Yes," Noah replied. "I finally understood what she was trying to tell me all these years." "Which was?" Noah smiled, looking toward the forest visible through their kitchen window. "That we're never really alone. Not if we learn to see the connections." In the years that followed, researchers continued documenting unusual bear behaviors in the Pine Ridge Forest. Echo raised cubs who showed unusually low aggression toward humans. Wildlife biologists noted subtle shifts in territorial patterns, suggesting gradual adaptation to human presence without conflict. The story of the boy and the bear faded from national headlines, becoming instead a quiet legacy that shaped conservation practices and research methodologies worldwide. Noah Collins himself eventually studied wildlife biology, bringing his unique perspective to a field still grappling with the implications of Scarface's behavior. "We keep trying to draw firm lines between human intelligence and animal cognition," he wrote in his first published paper. Perhaps we should instead focus on the spectrum of consciousness that connects all living things, the shared capacity for adaptation, memory, and, yes, even empathy that transcends the boundaries of species. Echo lived to nearly the same age as her mother, maintaining the watchful presence at the forest boundary throughout her life. Her daughters, and eventually their daughters, continued this unusual behavior, creating what researchers termed a multi-generational tradition of non-aggressive coexistence. And in the quiet community of Oak Ridge, the story lived on, not as sensation or miracle, but as a reminder of possibilities. Children growing up there learned to respect wildlife not from fear, but from understanding. They learned that sometimes the most important connections are those that can't be easily explained or categorized. As Noah Collins often told the students who visited the reserve, the forest has always been trying to communicate with us. Scarface just reminded us how to listen. In time, scientific understanding evolved to provide explanations for much of what had once seemed miraculous. Researchers identified neurological pathways for cross-species empathy. Studies documented unexpected cognitive abilities in large mammals. The concrete foundations were laid for what Noah had intuited as a child. Yet something remained beyond complete explanation: that first night when a bear chose to protect rather than harm a human child, setting in motion a story that would challenge fundamental assumptions about the boundaries between species. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain partially unsolved, existing in the space between scientific knowledge and lived experience. Perhaps some connections transcend our categories and classifications, reminding us that the natural world still holds wisdom we have yet to fully comprehend. For the bear and the boy who found each other in Pine Ridge Forest, explanations were never the point. Their story continues to unfold in the subtle shifts of scientific understanding, in the changed practices of conservation, and in the quiet moments when humans pause to consider their place within the larger community of living beings. And in the shadow of ancient trees, where sunlight dapples the forest floor, their legacy remains, a testament to the unexpected bonds that can form when we open ourselves to the possibility that we are not as separate from the wild world as we have come to believe. 20 years after Scarface first followed a lost baby through the forest, Noah Collins stood at the edge of the reserve that bore her name. At 31, he had become a respected wildlife biologist. His childhood experience informed a career dedicated to understanding and protecting the creatures many humans feared. The educational center behind him buzzed with activity: school children on field trips, researchers comparing notes, community members volunteering. What had begun with one extraordinary encounter had grown into a movement, changing how an entire generation viewed their relationship with the natural world. Noah watched as a group of children gathered around a guide near the forest's edge. Among them was a small girl with bright eyes who kept looking toward the trees as if expecting something: Maya Henderson, Emma's daughter, the child of the little girl Scarface had indirectly saved during that long-ago blizzard. "Dr. Collins," Maya called, spotting him. "Is it true you can talk to bears?" The other children giggled, but Maya's expression remained earnest. Noah walked over and knelt beside her. "I don't talk to bears, Maya," he said gently. "I listen to them. There's a difference." "Can you teach me how to listen?" she asked. Noah glanced toward the forest, where the great-grandchildren of Echo now roamed. "That's why we're all here." Later that evening, after the visitors had gone, Noah returned to stand alone at the boundary line. The fading light turned the forest into a cathedral of shadows and golden beams. He closed his eyes, feeling the connection that had shaped his entire life, not just to one bear who had once saved him, but to the entire living tapestry of which humans were just one thread. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a smooth river stone, identical to the one found in Scarface's museum so many years ago. He had carried it with him through college, through his travels studying wildlife around the world, through moments of doubt and discovery. Noah placed the stone on the boundary marker, a message for anyone who might understand its significance. Then he spoke, words meant not just for the forest but for all who would hear this story in years to come. The truth is, we were never alone. We've always been surrounded by minds different from our own, some with fur, some with feathers, some with scales, each experiencing this world in ways we can barely imagine. Our greatest mistake was believing our way of knowing was the only one that mattered. Scarface taught me that compassion doesn't require shared language or shared species. It requires only recognition, seeing the life in another being and acknowledging its value. In that moment, when a mother bear chose to protect a human child, the artificial boundaries we created between us and them dissolved, revealing the deeper truth we too often forget. We are all connected, we are all vulnerable, we all seek safety, belonging, and continuation. And in the end, we all share this one precious world, not as owners or conquerors, but as temporary caretakers of a legacy far older than humanity itself. Perhaps this is what the forest has been whispering all along, in the rustling of leaves and the paw prints left in soft earth. Perhaps this is what Scarface was trying to tell me that night when she guided a lost child home, that in this vast wilderness we call life, no one truly walks alone. We need only remember how to listen to the wisdom of those who walked these paths long before us and who will remain long after we are gone. This is not just Scarface's story or mine, it's the story of our shared world, waiting to be recognized anew. As darkness settled over the forest, Noah turned toward home. Behind him, at the forest's edge, a bear emerged briefly from the shadows, one of Echo's descendants, carrying Scarface's legacy in her DNA. She paused, sniffing the stone Noah had left, before disappearing back into the wilderness that was her birthright. Two different beings, two different paths, yet for a moment connected by an understanding that transcended words. A silent acknowledgement that they were part of the same story, a story still being written in tracks left in earth and snow, in scientific papers and children's books, in changed laws and protected lands. A story that reminds us that sometimes the most profound connections begin with the simplest act of compassion, when one being recognizes the vulnerability in another and chooses, against all expectation, to protect rather than harm. In that choice lies our greatest hope for healing the ancient divide between humanity and nature. In that choice lies the wisdom that might yet save us all. For we are not merely observers of the natural world, we are participants in its unfolding story. And how we choose to write our chapter will echo through countless generations, human and non-human alike. Listen closely. The forest is speaking, and it has been all along.